Some illnesses are incredibly good at hiding. They can look like a weak stomach. They can look like I just get migraines. They can look like severe motion sickness. They can look like anxiety. They can even look like health anxiety, like you're worried for no reason. No matter which clinic you go to, something seems to match. But when you stack all the symptoms together, everything turns into fear. Take Charles Darwin, for example. For years, he lived with recurrent nausea, vomiting, and stomach pain, along with headaches, exhaustion, and anxiety. And his motion sickness was so severe that normal life was nearly impossible. People have tried to explain it for generations. More than 40 different diagnoses have been proposed: stomach disease, nervous system problems, psychological causes. So many explanations they read like a checklist. But if we stop staring at Darwin alone and zoom out, if we look at his maternal family line, a new clue appears in the fog. Along the same maternal bloodline, illness seems sprinkled across relatives. For some, it's the brain. For others, the gut. Some are weighed down by mood and fatigue. Others develop tremors or Parkinson's-like features. It looks scattered and unrelated, yet it keeps circling the same systems: the nervous system, digestion, endocrine function, and persistent fatigue. That suggests something. There may be a shared cause underneath. Maybe cellular energy is the real issue. And here's what's surprising. This clue doesn't start in a lab. It doesn't start with gene sequencing. It starts with an 18th century painting. Let's go back to around 1780. The British artist George Stubbs painted the Wedgwood family. Horses, open grass, adults dressed formally, children nearby. But it's hard not to notice one detail tucked in the corner. A small girl sitting in a little pull cart, with her sister holding her steady. It doesn't feel like a posed portrait moment. It feels like caregiving, as if she can't stand, walk, or sit upright like the other children. Her name was Mary Anne Wedgwood. She lived from 1778 to 1786, and she was also Darwin's aunt. She matters because her illness was described in family letters. The notes are unusually detailed, almost like a case record that survived 200 years. Some researchers have even suggested she may be an early clue, pointing to a problem where the cell's power station isn't working properly. That power station, in modern terms, is the mitochondria. But let's be clear right here. We are not diagnosing historical figures. What we're discussing is a hypothesis, and a falsifiable one. Meaning, it can be tested and it can also be proven wrong. Here's the hypothesis. The Wedgwood family's maternal line may have carried an mtDNA variant that affected cellular energy production. Modern medicine has well-described patterns we can compare this idea to. For example, MELAS, and a commonly discussed variant called M3243A to G. You don't need to memorize those names. Just hold on to two key points. First, these conditions often follow the maternal line. Second, within the same family, symptoms can vary dramatically. Some people are severely affected, some only mildly, some barely show anything at all, but may still be impacted. To make the picture clearer, let's lay out the family background. The Wedgwoods were a well-known British pottery family. The founder, Josiah Wedgwood, and his wife, Sarah, had 8 children. Some sources describe Sarah as frail for much of her life, with significant whole-body pain and a difficult reproductive history. If we go back one more generation, there are also scattered notes of frailty and early deaths in her maternal relatives. None of that is definitive. But inside a maternal line framework, it isn't inconsistent. What really stands out is this. Across those 8 children, symptoms fall like scattered dots, yet still feel like different faces of the same hidden thread. The eldest daughter, Susanna, Darwin's mother, had intermittent vomiting when she was young, severe nausea during pregnancy, and later died of an acute abdominal illness. The eldest son, John, had lifelong hand tremors. The second son, Richard, died in early childhood. The third son, Josiah II, developed Parkinson's-like symptoms later in life. The fourth child, Thomas, had recurrent attacks starting in adolescence. Migraine-like headaches, abdominal pain, nausea and vomiting, extreme fatigue, and low mood. He also suffered severe motion sickness that was nearly impossible to relieve. The sixth child, Catherine, had no children and a more masculine appearance. Late in life, there are records of a large abdominal mass, possibly involving endocrine issues, but we can only say possibly. We can't conclude. The seventh child, Sarah, appears in records with fewer clear problems. Some portrait details have been discussed, but that's weak evidence. And the most critical case is the youngest, Mary Anne. She was small in stature. Her development was delayed. She had seizure-like episodes. She had repeated periods of blindness. Her abilities gradually declined, and she died at 8 years old. That little cart in the painting may also suggest limited mobility. What's especially painful is that her father's letters are so specific. He wrote that during teething she had a prolonged convulsion. Afterward, one side of her body was weak for a time. Later, she seemed to improve a bit, and the family thought she was recovering. But a few years later, she began to have trouble seeing. Often, she could only recognize objects by touch. Even in daylight, she couldn't see clearly. When she reached for things, she would miss, and had to try many times before she could grasp them. From today's perspective, it reads like repeated power failures. It may not have been the eyes themselves. It may have been certain areas of the brain running out of energy. Now, look again at Thomas, the family's fourth child. He was Darwin's maternal uncle. As a teenager, his headaches were so severe they affected his writing. At school, the headaches dragged him down until he had to stop studying. As an adult, the attacks continued. They often came with abdominal pain and vomiting, extreme fatigue, and low mood. He even traveled all the way to the West Indies, hoping a different climate might help. But during the voyage, he stayed in the cabin most of the time. Motion sickness, headaches, stomach pain. After landing, he improved briefly and then relapsed. Thomas and Darwin show a strikingly similar symptom cluster: motion sickness, migraine-like headaches, unexplained abdominal pain, fatigue, and anxiety. In their time, it was easy to label this as psychological. But if the maternal line clue is real, they may have shared a deeper underlying cause. So how would that clue reach Darwin? The key figure is Susanna, the eldest Wedgwood daughter and Darwin's mother. Mitochondria are mostly inherited from the mother's egg. So problems like this can echo through the maternal line, grandmother to mother to children. So if this hypothesis is correct, it's not surprising that the thread could reach Darwin. Now, you might ask, how can the same variant look so different from person to person? Let me use 2 metaphors. The first is mixed batteries. A cell may carry both good batteries and bad batteries. The higher the share of bad batteries, the more likely things break down, and the proportions can differ by organ. So for some people, it's mostly gut symptoms. For others, mostly neurological symptoms. Some may show endocrine issues or hearing problems. Some may simply feel unusually exhausted. The second metaphor is a random draw. When a mother passes mitochondria to a child, it can work like sampling at random. Different children from the same mother can inherit very different proportions of bad batteries. So, among siblings, one may be mildly affected, another severely affected. Some may decline early in childhood, others may show almost no symptoms. Of course, we have to stay cautious. In the 18th century, there were no modern tests. Records are limited. Infections, nutrition, childbirth risks, and the medicines and treatments of the era could produce similar outcomes. And symptoms like abdominal pain, joint pain, anxiety, and migraines are common in the general population. We can't treat their presence as a stamp of certainty, so the more careful takeaway is this. This family's pattern of illness is mechanistically compatible with the maternally inherited energy production problem. Mary Anne provides the strongest anchor. But hard evidence like genetic testing is missing. So it remains a reasonable hypothesis, and it could be disproven. There's one more point that's easy to miss. Why are problems like this so often dismissed as psychological? Because for many people, the first signs aren't obvious organ damage. They're fatigue, brain fog, sleep disruption, anxiety, depression, poor stress tolerance. Recovery after episodes can be slow, and they may be unusually sensitive to stress and infections. When the brain's energy supply is unstable, mood and cognition naturally become more volatile, and it's easy for someone to be labeled, "It's all in your head." Looking back at the Wedgwoods and Darwin isn't about settling a diagnosis for famous people. It's about remembering a clinical instinct. When suffering crosses body and mind and comes in waves triggered by stress or illness, headaches, seizure-like episodes, stroke-like symptoms, recurrent vomiting and abdominal pain, fatigue, poor exercise tolerance, muscle pain, anxiety, depression, cognitive decline. And when maternal relatives also have scattered, hard-to-explain symptoms, please don't dismiss it as, "You're too sensitive," or "It's just psychological." Sometimes what changes a life is considering a deeper biological thread, getting the right kinds of tests, and not letting someone's search for help end with, "You're overthinking it." And now, back to that painting. The Wedgwood family looks so calm you could almost miss the little cart. But for us today, that cart can feel like a reminder. Some illnesses aren't a sudden storm. They're an energy shortfall that drifts on for years. They leave people tired, anxious, dizzy, unwell again and again, until they no longer feel like themselves. Telling this story isn't about turning historical figures into case studies. It's about making sure that in real life, we don't keep missing patients whose symptoms are complex, misunderstood, and delayed for far too long. This video's visuals are a historical style reconstruction / AI-generated imagery, inspired by and based on the public domain artwork The Wedgwood Family, George Stubbs, circa da 1780. If you're interested in stories at the intersection of inherited metabolic disorders, IEMS, and mental health, including cases of metabolic psychosis, you can check out the full written version in the Junyi column.